I welcome all of you to this Global Genes webinar on building the bridge between foundations and industry. I'm Daniel Levine, principal of Levine Media Group and host of Global Genes Webcast, and it's my pleasure to be moderating today's panel. We've got a great pair of panelists today who can provide perspective from both the foundation and industry side, and they're going to share their insights from their experiences. Our guests today are Anne-Marie Bingo, Manager of Global Patient Advocacy for Horizon Pharma, and Ann Burns, Associate Executive Director and Operations Manager for the Atypical HUS Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to thank the staff of Global Genes, and in particular Ashley Yee, for her work putting together and coordinating today's program. The webinar is meant to be interactive. I encourage people watching this live to use the instant messenger in the bottom right-hand corner of their screen to send questions for the panel as we go. I'll do my best to work these questions into our conversation. We'll try to save time at the end for questions from the audience. Today we're discussing building the bridge between foundations and industry. This is a symbiotic relationship, but some interests don't always align. We're going to talk about ways to make sure that interests are aligned, how to understand your partner's needs, and establish credibility and trust. With that, let me turn it over to Anne-Marie Bingo, Manager of Global Patient Advocacy for Horizon Pharma. She's been involved in the biotech industry for more than 18 years and worked closely with patient organizations. She's going to begin with the presentation. Anne-Marie?
Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure to be here. Just wanted to start out by introducing a little about the company that I work with, which is Horizon Pharma. And it was in 2005, and it is a biopharmaceutical company with strong growth. Corporate headquarters are in Dublin, Ireland, and U.S. operations are in Lake Forest, Illinois, which is in the Chicago area. We have a little over 1,000 employees, and in our portfolio we have 11 medicines, some of which treat rare diseases, others which treat arthritis and inflammation. Our company is really committed to our community. The founder of Horizon, Mr. Tim Walbert, is a strong believer in giving back to the community, also in entrepreneurship. Therefore, we support many organizations which focus in these areas, as you can see from this slide. At our company, we have a patient advocacy department, which is the department that I work in. And the main focus is to work and interact with our patient organizations. A few examples of the organizations we work with can be found on the column on the left-hand side. So approaching industry, I have been asked many times, what is the best way to approach a company and what types of information are they looking for? What I recommend is for people to really think about things prior to the first meeting with a company. What types of information can you provide? And specific community needs that you are trying to address. What the company can do to help us these particular needs. That both sides need to be willing to have open discussions. We both need to know when to get involved and when to step out of a situation, and to understand what's appropriate and compliant. Industry feel that we need to ensure that patient groups are comfortable with asking questions. We should be willing to provide them with a single point of contact at the company to avoid confusion and many different touch points, as well as educate them on the rules of our industry and what we can and can't do as a company. There are many rules that we must follow in order to be compliant. We understand our groups, our newly formed groups, or the patient groups that are already well established. So we need to know where in their life cycle they are. So why I think this relationship is important. Perspective is critical throughout the drug development life cycle. The community offers valuable perspective which cannot be obtained anywhere else. This is essential not only for clinical trial design, but for feedback, educational, and support services. As a industry, we need to listen and learn from these communities in order to be successful, and include in areas such as clinical trial development. Once a drug is approved, to ensure that appropriate patients have access to the medication, and we continue with this relationship. One way in which Horizon does this is we believe in participating, listening, and learning. Because of this, a lot of our employees actively participate in numerous events and meetings throughout the country. On the screen, you will see just some examples of our involvement. We patients are the only ones who can tell us what it's like to live with a rare, isolating disease or chronic condition that requires daily, life-altering modifications. Also, their voice direct what we do as a company, how we bring our medicines forward to the services we provide and the resources that we support. We are always asking questions and we focus on creating programs based on that feedback from the community. I'll go over some examples of how we work together with the patient community. That by working together, we can support or develop programs which go beyond our medicines. Some examples on the screen are two programs that we've supported. The one on the left is scholarships for families to attend the Immune Deficiency Foundation annual meeting. That is one of the foundations that we work closely with for our chronic granulomatous disease community. On the right side, you will see a cystinosis scholarship program, which is actually done through Global Genes, and allows cystinosis patients to pursue their goals, be furthering their education, pursuing a hobby, or attending a seminar. Other type of resources that we've created is with our belief that the most successful resources should be co-created with the community. So we really turn to the patient and caregiver community as advisors and ask them to help co-create materials and resources for the community. Examples of these resources that we recently launched, created by the community for the community, are CD in Common, which you will see on the left, and right is CGD Connections. These two platforms, these are platforms that keep patients informed, provide valuable resources, such as travel tips, low-protein recipes, and different things that can be helpful. And they all bring the community together by sharing information and tips with each other. Encourage everyone in the community to participate and share information. We believe in a long-term commitment to rare disease. I would talk about a specific example, like Horizon's relationship with the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance, or FARA. It is a debilitating, life-shortening, degenerative neuromuscular disorder which affects approximately 1 in 50,000 people in the United States. In June of 2016, we found out that our medicine did not meet its primary endpoint in a phase 3 trial, and it was devastating news, not for the FA community, but for our employees who had become very attached, attending their numerous events and got to know many patients and families. So as you can internal, there were many tears that were shed. Because the FA community had become like a family to us, we decided that we needed to continue to support the organization. And today, we continue to support their bike rides, we attend their events, and I'm really honored to have Kyle and Sean, who you see on the screen, do a live recording of a podcast which they called Two Disabled Dudes, and they did a live recording of it at our offices in Lake Forest. The room was packed and it was standing room only. We continued relationship with FARA, allows us to keep learning and becoming better partners in the rare disease space. And I just wanted to go over another campaign that we recently launched. We believe that we have to work together to ensure that the public understands that by working together within industry and patient groups, we are to meet the needs of the patients and bring awareness to the rare disease community as a whole. The campaign, which is called Rare Is, was launched on Rare Disease Day in 2017. The aim is to elevate the voices, the faces, and the experiences of people living with rare disease. It just showcases tremendous stories of adversity, stories heard through our work with advocacy organizations, patients, and families. We wanted to help get these stories into the world to inspire people with rare diseases and educate the general public. This is part of Horizon's long-term goal of providing support that goes beyond what is typically expected from a pharmaceutical company. RARE is not only about the diseases our medicines treat, it brings light to all different types of rare diseases. Our recently completed Rare Is text campaign, which was in partnership with Global Genes. As part of the campaign, we made a donation to Global Genes every time a person texted the word rare to a specific number. They would also share their story and a picture. We ended up donating $10,000 to Global Genes, but even more importantly, hundreds of incredible pictures and stories submitted as part of the campaign. If you are interested in viewing some of these pictures, you can go to the Rare Is Instagram page. With that, I'd like to conclude and say thank you to everyone.
Well, thank you. I remind our audience that they can instant message questions they have for our panelists as we go, and we'll try to work them into our conversation as best we can or save them up for the end. Anne-Marie, from a company perspective, why do these relationships matter? We see this, I think, far in the rare disease space. What's in it for the drug company?
So we really think that these relationships are crucial in order for us to understand the patient perspective. As I mentioned earlier, patients are the only ones who can really tell us what it's like to live with a certain condition, which may sometimes require daily life-altering modifications.
Mentioned in your presentation was having when to get involved and when to step out. How do you know when to get involved and how do you know when to step out? And is there an example of when you've done either of those things?
It's important for us to just really listen to each other and understand what the needs are from the patient community. And we have to make sure that we do not, that the patient groups don't feel pressure from the industry to do something that's not within their scope. So really remain focused on what they want to accomplish, and we have to be respectful of that.
So you know that you've talked in the past about that there are uncomfortable situations that develop, and you've said patient groups need to understand they can say no. Can you explain that dynamic and how it's managed?
Yes, you have to understand that what is appropriate to ask and always be willing to accept no as an answer. As I said, we need to know when to step in and when to step out, and our patient groups should never feel pressured. So I feel that clear and open, honest communication is essential and very, very important in order for us to just really maintain that good relationship.
Well, there are things you touched on was the fact that you are in a highly regulated industry. There's strict guidelines on what you can do and what you can do. Do patient organizations understand that? Is there an education process you need to go through with them with them? What would like them to understand in regard about what a drug company can and can't do?
In industry, I believe it's our responsibility to really educate the patient groups on the guidelines that we must follow. And that's really important for patient groups who may just be getting started and don't really understand industry and the rules that we have to follow. So make sure that they're comfortable with asking those questions. And this all starts with open and honest dialogue. As we are highly regulated, and therefore there are a lot of rules that we have to abide by. So I think explaining what those rules are is important. And for the patient groups to ask those questions.
Is some example of the type of things you can or can't do that may not understand right off the bat?
I think we have to follow a lot of different rules when it comes to funding. There's different ways to designate a certain type of donation and donation. So there's just a lot of rules that we have to follow when it comes to funding the groups and how much percent can be given. So all of those questions are just really important for people to understand that we have to follow certain rules. And also, not only just there's internally within each company, all of us have a compliance department, and they also have certain criteria that they're comfortable with and that we need to follow within our own company as well.
We heard a lot about the growing efforts to incorporate the patient voice in the drug development process. How do you go about doing that, and how much weight does the patient voice carry within a pharmaceutical company?
In particular, we ensure that we reach out to a community as early as possible. We really want to get feedback, understand the disease state that we're working in very well. So we do our best to do our research on what patient groups may exist and set up meetings as early as we can with the community, which those help us really connect and learn about the specific challenges, and we may be able to help address some of those challenges.
There's often a bit of suspicion between patient groups and drug companies. One of the essential elements to any good relationship is trust. How do you go about building trust?
Trust is something that happens over time. It's never going to happen overnight. I think that clear and honest communication, constant communication is very important. We want to hear from our patient groups, and we want them to be able to connect with us whenever they feel the need. So I think just being available, having a single point of contact available to know that they can just reach out to this person and that person will always respond. So it's just something that we build over time, and just communication is just essential.
A question from a participant asking about the best way that they can figure out who at a company they should contact. Initiating contact with a company, know where to begin.
Sure. So a lot of companies, I think, especially recently, are starting to have a patient advocacy section within their website, which is one way to start. It usually have either an email address for a particular individual to contact. If you have a person that you've already spoken with at the company, you can always ask them who's in charge of your patient advocacy department or who works within that department, and they should be able to give you that name. It varies by company, but generally the department that you want to talk to is either advocacy or patient engagement. Those departments are the best ones to outreach to.
Our audience that they can instant message questions they have for our panelists as we go along, and we'll try to work them into our conversation as best we can or save them for the end. Let's turn to Ann Burns, Associate Director and Operations Manager for the Atypical HUS Foundation. Among her many duties, she's responsible for managing pharma and industry relationships for the foundation. And
good morning. How are you?
Good.
Say thank you for hosting this, and to Ann, thanks for everything that you and your company does. If I could create a wish list for a pharmaceutical company or an industry partner to follow, you've got everything right there. So for everyone listening, take note of everything that Ann has just said, because it's just fantastic.
Lose you on connection?
Okay, my phone just bleeped out for a second there.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Well, I'll just go ahead, and I was just asked to kind of introduce myself quickly. My name is Ann, and I came into the rare disease spectrum 2.5 years ago when my son was diagnosed with a rare disease called atypical HUS. It's a complement disorder. And we were fortunate at the time of his diagnosis to have had recently a drug that had been approved by the FDA. FDA just a short time earlier. With that treatment, our foundation that was founded about 12 years ago had already established a partnership with that pharmaceutical company. And it was a very and kind of easygoing partnership, and that also was helped form with the help of Nord and Global Genes, and just kind of a partnership between the three of us. Kind of at a very interesting right now in the life of our foundation, where we have not only where we have a relationship with one part, we also have other pharmaceutical companies that are working on potential treatments for our disease. And so that puts us at a really fascinating crossroads to reach out and build other relationships with their partners and also maintaining the one we have. And with, we've been able to see a lot of great growth, and we have a partnership, but we're also trying to form other partnerships. And so I was very excited about this because it helps us we're kind of in the middle. Even though we have one partnership, we're still in the middle of forming other ones. And so very happy to share what we can with everyone, what we've learned, what we're learning, and some of the things that have helped us, and also, here it is from Anne and the way that Horizon does, it helps us as well. We have really great for ours is we're lucky that we have a really strong community, and our community is very well connected, and that's been through the help of hosting national conferences to bring patients and clinicians together. We have had the opportunity to meet patients from the smallest rural towns of America to the biggest cities. The teams that we've been able to form have not only strengthened the community, brought patients together, but it helped us create a foundation that has been helpful as we've contacted other industry partners and let them know that an established community and an established foundation, and we have resources and we have interested, very excited. We have a treatment, but we have patients who are not on it or are willing to look at other options. And so we have this huge resource and supply of information to share with pharmaceutical companies. I talked about some of these, and they are just bullet points to the things that we would wish for. And just some of the ones I would share as far as creating a relationship with the industry partners is, she talked about it a little bit earlier, is just to understand the regulations and just ask. The majority of us as foundation leaders, we none of us went to school for this. We don't have college degrees in, managing a nonprofit or things like this. The majority of us are parents and patients themselves who have foundation try to find treatments and to just better the lives of their communities. And so we don't always understand the ins and outs, but there are actually so many people who do. And just being able to ask those around you will be immense help. So what I do is when you make a contact with somebody through an advocacy program, just ask what regulations are. Sometimes that they will send you, a copy or like some bullet points of things to look for. This is really helpful because you want to ensure that you're asking them anything that would compromise their policies and what they can and cannot do, and you don't want to compromise yours as well. The other sources is just the rare disease community as a whole. There's so many patient advocates out there who have years and years and this huge wealth of knowledge. I know there are a handful that I can reach out to on a daily basis and ask a question, and I get tremendous support and back from, because I've been around long enough to understand it. And so just being able to connect, we feel as a rare disease family, you feel very isolated because there's, usually so few of you, but a very small world once you kind of all get together, and you just, you start to navigate and know who's connected to so-and-so and who can help you. And the nice thing about the rare disease community is that everybody's willing to help. And so just ask a question what the regulations are. And then within your own foundation, just setting your own standards and stick to them. How are you going to work with industry? You know, what are the key points that is going to be beneficial for your foundation and your community, and just sticking with those and letting industry partners know from the get-go, you know, this is kind of how we work, and this is how you work, so how can we work together? Is just being able to projects and your plans and the different goals that you have. One of the things that I do every year to our industry partners is just to send out kind of a timeline of what we foresee for the upcoming year. You know, these are events that we're going to be hosting. These are conferences that we're going to be attending. These are goals for the year. And then, you know, you can break those down. Other thing that helps with that is just on the ideas of the communication, because those are a great way to be able to send out an email monthly or even quarterly to them, just letting them know how those are going. You know, if you had it at a conference like the month prior, what was your attendance, what some of the questions were, letting them know that you're established and, you know, how you foresee, and then asking them, oh, how can you work together for those? And we found within our situation and within our foundation and disease community that there are some things that we would have never thought about in ways that we could reach out and work with an industry partner. So sometimes it's just finding what other programs that they have. You know, we go and we contact and we have a conference call with usually one or two ideas in mind. And over the course of the call, I think we usually have like switched gears 100, you know, degrees, and just to be able to think, okay, how could we work better together for this? Is there a better idea for community support or physician education? So just understanding the needs of the industry and your needs as a foundation, and being able to find one little way that you can work together. Just like I said, just being open to all of those ideas. Sometimes they're not what you intended your emails or your calls or your meetings to be about, but you know, luckily for us, they have a huge, vast experience and knowledge within this area of their expertise, and they're able to share ideas with us. And so that has been really helpful, to just kind of, you know, back and forth and sharing ideas and being open to new ideas that you never thought of, and also being able to take those and implement them into the foundation has been incredible. Just earlier, but just frequent contact. You know, I do usually a monthly email, if not more, or phone call, and sometimes it's more. You know, if you are mentioning something that is going to be happening, you follow up that. And for me, I look at it as, you know, if I look at it as I'm an industry partner, I want to work with a foundation who has like a 5-year plan stuff, and what are the goals, and are they following through, and, you know, are they committed, because I want to invest in them and I want to have a committed partnership with them. And so enable for us to, you know, stay on top of things on our end, I feel that it helps, you know, to kind of secure our commitment to them as well. And last thing, one of the last things I always try to think about is to just be appreciative. I always tell our partners that, you know, over and over, because as a mother of a child with a rare disease, or if it was a spouse or whoever, you know, our minds are solely focused on this one disease, and everybody else has so many things going on, and you're in constant worry mode. And so just to know that there is one company out there who's working and focusing, you know, efforts on a treatment or something that could potentially help your loved one is just so amazing to me. And I always like to tell them, you know, thank you for all of your efforts, because they don't notice. You know, as a community, we are so excited when we hear about a drug reaching a new phase of clinical trial, or, anything good news, and we're always so thankful for that. The thing is just, we as a foundation, we have to remember to take some of the emotion out of it. A lot of us are parents, and we're very focused on our child and getting them help, or focused for our spouse or whichever loved one it might be. So we have our blinders on, and sometimes we just kind of step back and take the emotion out of it. If an industry does tell us no, it's nothing personal. It doesn't mean anything personal towards your child or to your community. That's just how it works. And so just being able to see both sides of the business side of it with the supportive side works well.
You there?
Sorry, my phone just keeps clicking. And the last thing I just wanted to just say was, as a foundation leader, you have the pulse on what your community needs. So, we have multiple, like either Facebook groups or email chains that go out. So, I mentioned this before, that they like to reach out to the advocacy group to know, as a nonprofit leader, you know exactly what your community needs, and make sure that you are sharing that with your partners as you meet with them. And I'll turn it back over to you, Daniel.
Great. Thanks so much, Ann. We do have a lot of questions from the audience. I had a slight malfunction on my chat, but I've got all the questions. But before we turn to that, let me ask you, Ann, from a foundation perspective, why relationships matter? What's in it for the foundation?
One is we're always looking to help with funding to move our programs forward. And actually, I would say the biggest one is just to be able to have this information available to our community. Because if you can partner with someone straight from the beginning, they're able to let not only physicians know of possible treatments or programs that might help their patients, but you're let families know of other options they have. And some people haven't even one option yet. So just knowing that something's coming around the corner is a huge, almost a hope to cling on to for these families.
We talked about the need for drug companies to build trust and credibility with foundations, but what advice do you have for how they could best do that?
Letting them know that you're an established foundation. I try to go in there with, straight facts, what are numbers, what are we looking at, how many people are in our community, what do we do, how do we implement these things, and know that we are a solid foundation. We're not just something that's popped up and we kind of want to be around for a little while and then we're going to vanish. We know that we are committed to our community and helping them and helping the industry be able to move forward as well. We need them just as much as they hopefully need us.
In your experience, do you think companies look at organizations like yours as simply seeking, or do they a multidimensional view of that relationship and look at it as a true two-way partnership?
We've been fortunate with the companies that we have worked with that it has been a multidimensional fund. We have quite a few companies that we have a relationship with that don't have anything available for us. That doesn't mean that won't be something down the road, but to establish that partnership now because for the potential. And I think when you can create and maintain that relationship, even if you're not getting something out of it, speak volume. Because down the road, I always refer to the rare disease as one big puzzle, and we each hold a very small piece of it. And I connect with a company who doesn't have anything for us now, but in years they might. And I want to be able to keep those lines of communication open. And maybe they don't, but maybe someone in their area or someone they know in another industry spectrum does. That's another key when someone was talking about who do you talk to. I always look at not only companies who are currently developing drugs for us, but I look at companies who are developing drugs that are similar to ours and also that are developing drugs for diseases that are similar to ours. They have nothing to do with atypical HUS, but it's on kind of that same spectrum. I keep them on our radar and establish contact because we just never know what the future of medicine holds, and we want to have that partnership.
Credibility is important for foundations. Do foundations need to worry that if they get money from drug companies that they're somehow compromised? Can they risk credibility with patients if they're seen as being cozy with industry?
I think that is a risk, and I think that there is potential for that. And I think that that is one of the things that as your board or your directors, you need to be able to set your own standards of you will accept money for, how it will be used, and then also transparency, you know, annual reports of what was used for, you know, what funds were used for, letting them know. And you know, everyone and every patient will have their own opinion when it comes to pharmaceutical companies, but we try to be very Switzerland, very neutral in our dealings and setting our own standards and our own regulations, just to keep that credibility there, that we are there for the community. We have a deep mutual respect, and we would anticipate the same from the industry. But to know that our community comes first and foremost.
Well, how necessary or easy is it to spell out with a partner what isn't appropriate? Is there ever a need to in a document, or how do you manage expectations?
We have just been able to just kind of have that conversation as we've talked to them, and that kind of comes across. It's kind of just come about as we've met with them and talked about what our needs are. And, you know, maybe we put on a lot of national conferences. Maybe we're looking for sponsors for portions of that, and not turning every 100% over to one industry partner.
So in building these relationships, how important is it to have a single point of contact?
I think that is key. To have one designated contact, they're the ones that are going to be kind of your eyes and ears into the whole company. You know, you can't always be talking to research and development, and can't talk to so-and-so in the law department or whatever. So being able to have one that can kind of take everything that's going on their end and be able to translate it for you, if you will, into what you need is really helpful. I think also on both sides, you know, we when we have been able to meet with an industry partner, we let them know who do they contact at our foundation. You know, I'm over certain things, but if they wanted something else, they can go and talk to so-and-so. That way everybody is on task of what they need to be doing, and they understand, and there's not a whole lot of back and forth, and there's a lot of time lost when you are able to have these conversations.
Well, let's bring Anne-Marie back into this conversation. One of the realities in the rare disease world is that organizations fighting for the same causes don't work well together. In fact, there can be a lot of competition. I'm wondering if you can offer thoughts on how this dynamic might complicate a relationship between a drug company and a patient foundation, and if you have any on how to diffuse that. Anne-Marie?
Sure. So, you know, I think this is a challenge that some companies may face. I think the important thing to remember as a company, we need to understand the strengths and areas of opportunity for each of our groups. And Anne mentioned earlier, we need to remain neutral. At our company, we work with all of the groups, or at least we try to, and we believe that everyone should be offered a seat at the table. So we don't leave one out. We try to be inclusive. And, you know, as you communicate with these groups, you get to know them, you really understand what their focus is and where their strengths lie. So I think it's possible for us to work with several different groups. And as long as the groups understand that we're not able to play favorites, and that everyone will have a seat at the table, I think if they're to accept that, then we can all work well together.
And at you.
I really just have to almost just everything that Anne said, and it's just and be able to find ways to be able to work together and not limiting yourself. You know, we try to seek other funding from other sources. You don't want to put all solely onto one company or one source of funding or just support in general. So I think that the more you can be open and have different things as a foundation, you're not going to be solely focused and then willing to lower maybe some of your own regulations or standards that you've set because of other options.
One question from the audience touches on this a bit, but I've never heard of such a thing, but do non-compete issues exist in dealing with a foundation dealing with multiple drug companies?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've never heard of that, but I've never heard of that or don't know about that.
Well, something else. You know, we've seen a number of organizations start to issue formal guidelines on how they'll interact with industry. Is this something your organization does, or do you think this is something that organizations should do to increase transparency and make sure that everyone's on the same page?
A great idea to, before you start reaching out to industry leaders, to set what you are going to do. And when that comes about in the conversation with the industry partners, it might be different. You know, for some of us, some of our contacts right now are just simple emails. We're just trying to maintain some type of connection. I think once you start getting deeper into actual support, then you definitely want to make sure before any of that is even after that they know where you come from as well as you know what regulations are. I think that it's key because if you know, if on both sides, if everybody knows the rules of each other's organizations, there's not going to be any dilemma or any, you're not going to have any roadblocks in trying to work something out.
And maybe this is an audience question that's better geared at you, but what phase in drug development will a pharma company engage with the patient community and fund projects for awareness?
I think more and more it's becoming where industry really wants to get that patient perspective as early as possible. So I would say that the trend is moving towards the earlier the better, because you want to make sure that you're considering their needs at a step of the process. So I would say it's as early as possible.
Of companies doing this in preclinical development when they're trying to build natural histories. Is that something you've been involved with?
I have not been involved with that, but yes, it's something that's talked about often. And yes, I agree. So as early as possible, earlier the better. I mean, we need to learn from each other. So I don't think you do it early enough.
We have a question here about whether a pharma company will fund with the patient group for awareness prior to them getting an FDA approval for their therapy for a certain disease.
Yes, I think there's definitely opportunities for that. If you're in contact with a state, if a company in contact with a patient group, there's different opportunities, and each company is going to be a little bit different, and they're going to all have the rules of how they engage with such activities. But it's not unheard of, and it's something that if you're really in it for the community, that you may want to support them whatever they're trying to accomplish. So I think it's definitely a possibility. It's just going to always be on the particular rules of each company.
A question from the audience I'll address to both of you has to do with how does an organization determine which company would be a good fit for them and the disease they're dealing with, especially a disease that deals with low birth weights in infants. Any thoughts on that?
Also, we look at our disease, and it's a lot of Google searching and a lot of talking to other places. Do you know who? And just asking around. But we look for companies who are treating diseases similar to ours, and that are making drugs that are similar to the treatment that we have. So ours is a very specific treatment. We look at anything related. We have a disease that is kind of a cousin to ours, if you will. And so I watch a lot of those trials and a lot of those companies and finding anything that's similar and then just reaching out and talking to them.
A related question for you. Look for in a foundation to be a candidate for building a productive relationship?
Well, generally there's transparent. So transparency on both sides about what each of us are and finding common ground. I think that's one way to get started, just to even start that conversation and then figure out what are needs and can they be met. So I think it's going to always start with a open conversation and asking a lot of questions on both sides and learning from each other. So that's how I think things should at least get started, and then use decisions based on the outcome of those conversations.
Back to an earlier part of the discussion where we talked about what drug companies can and can't do. Think it all about what pharma companies have to do to be compliant and how the patient groups can work together to do research on the diagnosis of disease, which stands as a big barrier to patients getting treatment.
Part of the question, I'm sorry, can you repeat it, Danny? Was it
Sure.
What
asking for a little bit more specifics on what being compliant means to a drug company, consider regulated.
Right. So, we follow certain rules that apply before a drug is approved and on the market, and then a different set of rules once a drug is approved and available. So we have to be, as an industry, aware of what those particular rules might be. So things can change within with a patient group from the beginning toward, and as the drug develops, the relationships also develop. But I think as long as there's transparency about what's happening, everyone can be aware of what those rules are and how they've changed. So educating about why we can't do certain things at certain points, I think that's very important.
Has to do, we talked a little about the tension that there could be with multiple disease foundations working on the same space. There's a question here about how industry determined to support regional versus national foundations and collaborations between the two. Does it come up at all in your work?
So we work with basically both national and regional. The support could just depend on what the need is. So that's where I think having a clear ask is all important. So and what is really needed. Obviously, national support tends to be a bit larger than the regional support, but it doesn't mean that it can't change, or it doesn't mean that that's the way it has to be. We all have to always be creative, think openly, be whatever the suggestion might be or the asks, and have that dialogue with each other about what really need to accomplish on both ends.
What would you say the best way, you can both on this, what's the best way for an organization to start a conversation with a potential pharmaceutical partner? How do they go about introducing themselves, scheduling an appointment, exploring opportunities to collaborate? Who should they speak with?
I'll answer this from our end. I make a lot of cold calls and a lot of emails and just finding out who is over a patient advocacy program. If they don't have a program established yet, who would be kind of over that. I've also been able just to reach out via just different connections through LinkedIn and, you know, things like that. Sending an email, who can I contact with, and then just kind of called, you know, I would just like a quick 10-minute call to introduce myself and our foundation, just a quick introduction. And then based on that conversation, you'll be able to see where your follow-up comes from. Although going to different conferences, our disease is specific to nephrology and hematology, so we attend both of those conferences. And my 3 days, I make a point of visiting every pharmaceutical booth that has any possible connection to our disease, just able to get business cards and introduce and passing my card. In the future, we can just reach out and have more of these introductory emails. And, you know, just have to start somewhere. And if it's a cold call or a cold email, it will eventually lead to a further conversation. And I always have the frame of mind, the worst that can happen is they say no. So it never hurts to ask. It never hurts to have a quick 5-10 minute phone call. You know, you should always be looking just for somebody. And, you know, one of the interesting things is sometimes we've talked to somebody at a specific pharmaceutical company, and they're not working necessarily on us, but they've resourced somebody else that might be helpful to us. So making that connection, it might not follow through, but it might lead to somewhere else.
A question here about whether the FDA has guidelines for patient engagement and whether you know whether that's public available that people can go read on. Either of you know?
I'm not sure about that.
I
do know that
specific guidelines around that specifically, but I know the FDA has a lot of information out there, and it never hurts to educate yourselves on it might lead you to answer some of your questions.
And we just did a rare cast with Betsy Bogart of the IFOPA, which just a year ago crafted their own guidelines, which are publicly available. I'd encourage you to take a look at those. And I do know that some pharmaceutical organizations, industry organizations, also maintain guidance in both here and the United States. Let me do both this. We often learn from mistakes, and when things go wrong than we do when things go right. I'm wondering, each of you might be able to talk about something you've learned along the way in working with a partner when something go as well as you had hoped, and how it might have changed your approach.
I can answer. When so in January, we do have an established relationship with one pharmaceutical company, and so when we had multiple that coming out of, you know, as other possibilities, I jumped into a lot of these contacts and as of partnering that it was going to be as easy as our established relationship was. And it was not easy. In fact, it was extremely difficult. And we took it very personal that maybe, you know, for whatever reason, we kind of took it more on a personal side and pulled away from some of these companies because we just thought, you know, maybe there's just nothing for us there. And after talking to quite a few other resources that I have, thankful for those friendships and kind of learning more about how industry works, we did our whole kind of like game plan on how to approach them and kind of started over from scratch, understanding that there are also startups as well. And you know, just letting them even know that we're not professionals and we're learning as we go. How can we work together? And, you know, so the learning curve for us was to stop and start over again resetting our frame of mind because we weren't getting anywhere with our old game plan and started a whole new one. And I think you just have to be able to stop and evaluate what's working. If it's not working, and move on.
Thoughts?
Yeah, and a similar situation. I think that you know, our industry companies are always by each other, and so in those types of situations, sometimes we inherit relationships that were previously set. So I think it's important, like Anne mentioned, that you kind of have to start over sometimes. That you don't want to make any assumptions based on history that you were given or anything. So you want to really kind of start over, start dialogue all over again, kind of like a nice to meet you again, and see if you can work something out that way. So I completely agree with Anne. Sometimes you just have to relook at the way things are done and do them differently.
Also, a question about drug pricing, which I know patients struggle with the high price of rare disease therapies. A real and meaningful way that drug companies are addressing this, and you know, I don't know if the answer is patient assistance programs or other ways, but is there a role that these partnerships play in addressing that?
So I think, you know, as an industry as a whole, we have to just be, we have to really clear about where why the way it is, and the types of services that we start to provide based on some of those some money, right? So as we all know, you know, medications for rare disorders are expensive, and we just need to educate our foundations as to why the drug is priced the way it is, and have that conversation so that any questions or concerns they have can be addressed in a transparent manner. I think we just have to do that responsibly and have clear communication.
A parting thought I ask each of you, what advice you would give to the leaders? So, Anne-Marie, for foundations, for how to improve their relationship with drug companies, how to get the most out of that relationship?
Advice would be that they need to know their strengths and never compromise. I mean, you know, everything is about compromise, but don't compromise your basic goals and your needs. Always wrong about that. Always know what you can offer and what you bring to the table, and never underestimate yourselves. The patient voice is extremely important, and industry really needs to hear that voice. And as long as we're both open, honest on both ends, then those relationships can be very successful. But we have to listen to each other and understand where we each come from.
And what advice would you give a drug company for how to improve its relationship with foundations? How to get the most out of that relationship?
Understanding that while the industry has a more clinical approach to these, we have the emotional and the supportive approach to it, because we're dealing with families and, you know, their individual emotions. And that with that, we can bring a lot to the table, and to contact us early, get involved early with the foundation. We have patients that are willing to go on clinical trials. They're willing to be part of studies and you know, be involved with histories and whatnot. And just, you know, contacting a foundation from the early beginning, getting them involved, understanding that they are not professionals, and then you know, we both have talked about just teaching them, letting know the basics of the regulations and how you can work together, and finding some similar ground to work together on.
Well, thank our panelists today, Anne-Marie Bingo, Manager of Global Patient Advocacy for Horizon Pharma, and Anne Burns, Associate Executive Director and Operations Manager for the Ethical HUS Foundation. Thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank the staff of Global Genes, and in particular Ashley Yee, for her work putting together and coordinating today's program. Before we go, I want to remind our listeners that registration is open for 2 Global Genes events next month. Be sure to join us for the inaugural Rare Partnering and Investor Forum, September 14th in Irvine, California, which will bring together innovators and investors. The Rare Patient Advocacy Summit will be held September 15th and 16th in Irvine. This brings together rare disease patient advocates from across the globe to learn from each other and collaborate. More information can be found on globalgenes.org. I hope you'll join me every week for our Rarecast podcast, which you can find on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and other podcast platforms. You can continue the conversation with us by following us on Twitter. You can find me at DS Levine and Global Genes at Global Genes. As you seek to learn about rare disease and connect with others, I encourage you to explore the many resources available on the Global Genes website. On behalf of Global Genes, I'm Daniel Levine. Thank you all for joining us and being part of today's webinar.